Welcome back to our next Respect Project talk with an illustrious panel of speakers. We are so honored and grateful to be here with Special Olympics. It's our second talk in our series about creating, inspiring, and nurturing inclusive work environments. We are lucky to be here with Special Olympics' very treasured partners, CARLA DEEGAN, who's the Senior Manager of Community Marketing at Coca-Cola, Stephanie LOMIBAO-PARRA, Philanthropy Director at Bank of America Charitable Foundation, Scott Gregory, Area President of Los Angeles at Gallagher, Angela Woods, Senior Director of course, Corporate Citizenship at ESPN, MARCIE NYMARK, Director of Brand Partnerships at Microsoft. Welcome, and thank you so much for your time and coming and having this conversation about the work that you're doing at your corporations and your hopes for the future, and how you got started creating this inclusive work environment at these huge brands and how you navigated that. I'd love to start with you, Angela, and talk a little bit about what ESPN's history is with Special Olympics and the Berlin World Games in 2023, and how you're using the platform at ESPN to get that messaging out there.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us today. Nice to meet you, Elizabeth. Just to give some context and background, ESPN and the Walt Disney Company have had a relationship with Special Olympics for nearly 40 years now, working to end discrimination against people with intellectual disabilities. I'm pleased to share that since 2013, ESPN has been the global presenting sponsor of Special Olympics Unified Sports, which works to foster an inclusive culture, which empowers athletes with and without intellectual disabilities to engage through the power of sports. So we've been really passionate about that from an ESPN lens, but a broader company relationship has been formed over the last 4 decades. As you mentioned, the World Games coming up next year in Berlin, we're the global broadcast partner. We were happy to renew our support as the global presenting partner for the broadcast of Special Olympics, which will include the World Games, as you mentioned, the Winter World Games, USA Games, and others through the year 2027. So for us, it's really been a great partnership.
You dropped out, Angela.
Oh, sorry about that. For us, it's been great to have the partnership from a platform perspective to really tell the story from a content perspective and talk about these athletes. We've been able to spotlight their incredible stories and achievements and bring these inspiring stories of these young athletes who are out there making a difference in their communities and around the world to viewers across our platform. So for us, it really is the ability to naturally tell the story so people get a better understanding of who the athletes are, that they're just like everybody else. They want to be included in the conversations as part of the work that's being done. And so for us, it's been a meaningful experience to be able to do that, to be in a position to really talk about their work and to talk about the things that mean so much and are significant to them, and to really tell them in such a compelling way through the games and all of the other activations we do with them, through the content we develop, whether it's the World Games or USA Games, really looking for those rich stories to really tell the success and the inspiration of these athletes. That's what's most meaningful for us in the history and in the relationship, and really bringing light to the issue around inclusion and what that means for these athletes.
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to also being in Berlin, and my personal experience. Also, we were in our last talk with Special Olympics talking about ESPN's commitment to also employing people with ID. And I just really have found the athletes to be incredibly inspiring to me from my perspective as a human being, as a worker, as a creative, their spirit, their sense of community, their resilience, their power, their passion, their love of one another, their sense of community, which is ultimately what leadership is all about. And you creating that platform and celebrating the World Games where they all come together equally to support one another to thrive is really inspiring. I want to talk about the importance of all of our platforms really getting that messaging out there that you spoke so beautifully about, Angela. MARCIE, the importance of technology accessibility for people with ID is something that you have been working on tirelessly, and the success of the Gaming for Inclusion activations that you've been working on with Special Olympics. Could you share with our audience what that is, what that means, and what you've achieved?
Yeah, thank you. And I will say, not just me. I think it is a huge mission across Microsoft to be thinking about accessibility first, building it into design from the beginning. And hopefully not just Microsoft. I think it's a technology industry wide issue, and we need the full ecosystem, right? It can't just be one. So really advocating and sharing and how we build together. I think spreading, not just where we think about standard tech tools like we're using conferencing right now, but into technology we use every day, like gaming. And that's been such a joy to be embarking on with Special Olympics. It's been a multi-year journey. We think of, okay, this big event that just happened in September, second annual Gaming for Inclusion event, where we had athletes from across North America competing, had an opportunity to compete and play live with some amazing celebrity talent in Rocket League. Incredible to watch and see. I think really similar to sporting events where it's that big play, it's that game changer. You see it, everyone's cheering, but it's built on a foundation of years of work. It's been actually since 2017 that we've been talking about gaming and what that could do within the Special Olympics movement, really their dedication and diligence to making sure it's an authentic fit and leading, just as you said, Elizabeth, into connection, right? How do we make sure it's bolstering, it's connecting with sports and health and leadership programming and providing opportunities for all of the athletes and the gaming community to connect with the movement, to build, to have some of that experience that you just shared about meeting with the athletes and really connecting. This year, one of, I think, the big wins and successes of the event was not just seeing the athletes compete, but actually bringing them into the gaming industry and bringing 3 athletes to our Redmond campus to get training as shoutcasters. So if you're not in the world of esports, shoutcasting is like play-by-play commentary, like you see on any, nightly NFL game. And we were so thrilled to have 3 Special Olympics athletes come learn, the tips, learn the trade, and then be the voices, the real live voices commenting on the games on our Xbox Twitch channel for all of the viewers out there watching. I think it opens up doors, beyond just participating in gaming as an actual player, but thinking about where else can we include more people with intellectual disabilities and other disabilities in the entire ecosystem of a gaming community.
And how much we can benefit from knowing them and their sportsmanship and their sense of passion for what they do, and and how that's the one thing that it's not just about creating a platform for them or creating a voice for them or including them. It's about how much we can gain from each other as human beings, because like I said, they're the athletes are living at such a level of excellence and such support for one another, and really creating those platforms for, I look forward to talking to you, Scott, about coaching. But let's go back a little bit in time and talk to you, Carla, about the history of Coca-Cola's partnership with Special Olympics. It's a long relationship. It's over 50 years, right? And I'd love to talk about how has Coca-Cola been this partner with Special Olympics, and how has the brand helped, but just about the history. And maybe you can even share with us a little bit of the history of Special Olympics, because you have the longest relationship, or not you, but the brand has had with Special Olympics. It's a beautiful legacy.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you for having me. And this is an amazing conversation with a wonderful panel. So happy to talk about that. Certainly extremely proud of our long heritage with Special Olympics. But before I do that, I'll just kind of take a step back and just talk about Coca-Cola and really its role in inclusion in general. I think that might help a little bit. And for us, I feel like we kind of got a little bit of a head start simply because our very first product was developed in a pharmacy. So Coca-Cola was developed by a pharmacist as a happiness elixir, as a product intrinsically to lift each other up and promote optimism and happiness. And so we've been very lucky that from the very beginning, Coca-Cola was for everyone. It was a product for everyone. And that's given us a really great long history to promote inclusivity, whether it's with ad campaigns, brand platforms, and then of course, social commitment work that we do every day. As a founding partner of Special Olympics, you know, our company mission is refresh the world and make a difference. And I'll tell you, there's really, and I know I'm a little biased, but there's nothing to me like our partnership with Special Olympics that brings that mission to life for us. And we were founding partner right when it was getting off the ground with Eunice Kennedy Shriver at Soldier Field at the first games. And we continue to walk and lift the mission up alongside all of the amazing athletes and people at Special Olympics. And for us, where we want to show up and how we want to show up is really to celebrate the athletes. We have, Angela mentioned it, we have such a wonderful opportunity to celebrate the amazing humans, athletes, leaders, all of these people are. And so when we show up to Berlin, the World Games or the USA Games, or even at state games, we want to bring the fun. I mean, Coca-Cola is a fun company. We have a lot of fun brands. We want the athletes to feel that. And so that's sort of our the way we think about our activations. But to me, that's just the tip of the iceberg. And I think the most exciting thing that we're doing and have done over the last couple of years and really want to grow is the Unified Leadership Program. And to me, when you think about shared value of a partnership, and Angela hit on this, and Marcie as well, there are so many amazing individuals and leaders within the organization. There are people who have podcasts. There are people who are creative designers. There are so many, there's so much talent in the organization. So we believe we have such a big opportunity to partner with Special Olympics to educate our Coke leaders on what it means to be inclusive, tell their experience of their first job at a grocery store when they were overlooked to become a cashier. I think all of those stories hit home and help us understand that everybody of all abilities can be included and do great work. And then we also want to connect people. We want to bring them along, bring them into some of our youth panels and connect them within our communities as well. So that's just a little bit of background and what I'm excited about specifically working with the organization.
I love two things you really highlighted. One is just the joy, the celebration of humanity, the celebration of individuality, each other, and sort of this beautiful way of just creating happiness, joy, community, inclusion, but also in sort of helping create ways in which people with intellectual disabilities can navigate their careers also within corporations, making it accessible to them, helping them in their specific journey with their specific needs, talents, skills, gifts, all of the things that make them uniquely beautiful and whoever they are as an individual, but also really allowing them to be a part of the community and making it possible. And I think that's just incredibly important when we talk about employment, and also just getting specific with our partners at Special Olympics and how we can include people with intellectual disabilities in each of our individual communities. And that leads really beautifully to you, Scott, to talk about the importance of coaching and the webinar you did, and really creating a platform of inclusion to help strengthen the coaches. And so let's get a little bit into that. Why is Gallagher deeply involved in promoting coaches using social media video content to promote inclusion? I think it's really important because we have to have a deeper understanding of how we can all help each other have a more inclusive world, especially within our corporate structures.
Absolutely. And again, Elisabeth, thanks for having us today. It's great to be here with all the partners, and, CARLA for 50 years for Coca-Cola. That's great. Gallagher is just a little behind. We started our partnership with Special Olympics in beginning of 2020. So we're 3 years in, and it's been an amazing global partnership for us. And when we looked at it, we're the official sponsor of sports and coach programming. And that was important to us, and I'll talk a little bit about why that is. But in addition to being global, we also are in 5 local regional areas in Southern California, Illinois, New York, Ontario, Canada, and Australia, and really trying to get a lot of focus on employee engagement there as well. But as far as coaching goes, we just saw so many shared values with Special Olympics and what the movement is all about in our partnership. We have a lot of shared values, but For us, it's the commitment to inclusion, respecting the abilities of all people, and really it's about the mutual commitment to ensuring everyone is able to face their future with confidence. And so when you think about the athletes and what they have to go through, it takes a good coach, it takes a good mentor in the workplace, on the field, and that's what we really like. We like to think that we're mentors and coaches for our clients that we work with, so it's a natural extension of what we do, and coaching is what we've been focused in on.
I like it. You're ensuring the future of an inclusive community and an inclusive world. Stephanie, let's talk a little bit about Bank of America and the importance of employing people with intellectual disabilities. I know that Bank of America employs many people with disabilities and differing abilities, including 300 plus people with ID and support, and specifically services in Delaware. So I'd love for you to share that and sort of all of those endeavors, but also what the benefits have been for the corporation as a whole to be more inclusive.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And can I just say +1 to everything my fellow panelists have been saying? Like every time they mention what their respective companies are doing, I see the joy, I feel the spirit. And so it's just an honor and privilege to be among all of you. I'm really, really proud to work for Bank of America. We've partnered with Special Olympics for 40 years. So not as long as Coke, but still 1982 is a long time. And we've supported a number of different programs with Special Olympics. But Elizabeth, to your point, employing teammates with diverse abilities is core to who we are. It's the fabric of who our company is. Our own CEO, Brian Moynihan, really helped champion and establish our employee resource group focused on the Disability Action Network, taking action for inclusion. I think what's important about us and our role as employer is intentionality. So we do this for a lot of reasons, again, echoing what the panel is saying, but as a company that's focused on responsible growth, it is good business. Our support services teammates, for example, our in-house marketing and reprographics team, and it is a for-profit arm. Like they not only save our company money, but they can show proof that they generate revenue as a team. But we have teammates with diverse abilities across our company, not just support services, but also in our technology team, in consumer and in marketing. I think what's important is that our company wants to be intentional about ensuring that people with visible and non-visible disabilities feel included, feel like they belong. And that intentionality goes from the top of the house with all of our senior leaders all the way down to our over 200,000 employees across the globe. When we found out that our very own teammate Carl Williams competed in the USA Games this year, it was like, we had a celebrity among us, and it felt so good to just rally around him and to support him, to see his story amplified through all of our digital channels, our social media channels, and to have hundreds of employees in the Florida area come out to cheer just for him and some of the other athletes and families that were competing in our title venue. So I love it. I love support services because, yes, we do employ individuals with intellectual disabilities, and we've shown return on investment, but we also have taken that model and put it in a playbook for other companies to leverage and use, because we believe that it doesn't just end with us. It starts with us as a company, but we can share it with the rest of America, if not the world.
I just want to stay with you for a second, Stephanie, and talk about the recruitment process, because in our last conversation with Special Olympics, we had athletes come on and talk about, their journey to get jobs in sort of the corporate world, and how sometimes it's hard to navigate, but certain corporations make it accessible and available and more easily accessible. So I just would love for you to talk about recruitment efforts and when you're talking about fostering an inclusive environment.
Absolutely.
And guys, feel free, all of you, to respond to that if you feel that it pertains to you, your mission, your work.
I think we're successful at building a cohort of diverse abilities within our company, across our company, because we have a dedicated human resources recruiter that specializes in and looks for talent from individuals with diverse abilities. I also think we're successful because our teammates, especially our teammates in support services, they love their job and they tell their friends and their family members, and the word gets out. And so we have 4 locations for support services, and it's a team of 300 teammates strong. So Belfast, Wilmington, Boston, and Dallas. And I love this question, Elisabeth, because it's not just inclusion and diversity, it's also equity and access. So all of our teammates, regardless of ability or team, they have access to the same benefits, the same services. They are part of the employee resource group. They're part of all of the benefits that they can receive from Bank of America. And so just making sure that that intentionality, that unified, right, spirit and culture really is the lead behind why we want to be the employer of choice and the best place to work.
Yeah, and that's why so much I want to have these conversations with individuals such as yourself, because we can help one another. We can share what we're doing successfully to help strengthen the work that we're doing today and in the future as we navigate how to be more inclusive. So I think all of this conversation, future conversations, are just really important to start implementing successfully a more inclusive environment. Angela, I just wanted to talk to you about, you know, your ESPN, do you guys set goals, measurable goals? I mean, any tips for other organizations on how to implement successfully a more inclusive work environment? And, you know, do you guys meet on that topic? Do you have, you know, what's your sort of practices?
So much of that is determined. We're owned by the Walt Disney Company, for those who may not know. Much of that is determined at a larger level, right? As opposed to each segment. So we don't have disparate or separate goals for Marvel any different from ESPN or our ABC News Network. So it's really set the tone from a corporate perspective by the Walt Disney Company. I will note that Disney has been recognized once again this year for the 5th consecutive year as a best place to work for disability and inclusion, based on its DEI equity index scores. And so it really strives to ensure and works to ensure
really,
that
congratulations.
we are making sure that we make our guests and our consumers feel more accessible. So whether it's things like modernizing our best practices to create inclusive content across the studios, to accommodating people with disabilities across our theme parks and resorts, it's really about building more accessible spaces in both the consumer experience as you come to Disney, but also in the content that we develop for the studios, for ESPN, or any of the other business segments. And specifically for ESPN, our vision is to be an organization that values diversity, normalizes inclusion, and ensures equity, really fostering a sense of belonging. And that really shows here both for our employees, but also in how we show up in the marketplace with our storytelling, with our content, with any of our entertainment activations. We really want to make sure that we are fostering a sense of belonging for everyone that's part of the Walt Disney Company. And however you receive that, be it through our content, our movies, the experiences at the parks and resorts or cruise lines, or from watching our sports broadcasts, right? We want to make sure that people can see themselves, feel valued, and know that they belong in the work and the efforts that we're trying to do collectively across the Walt Disney Company. So while there are not specific targets, there are specific programs and efforts at a corporate level to make sure it's reflected both internally with our employees, but also how we show up in the marketplace.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you just touched on something really important with advancing technology. Marcie, I'd love to talk about, I know that, you know, you want to make you want to make technology as accessible to everybody as possible, and up-to-date tools need to be successful for people with intellectual disabilities. So if you could talk a little bit about that and how the tournaments offered machine captioning in English, as well as live American Sign Language and human-driven audio descriptions and so forth. You know, can you talk about how you prioritize that and what that journey was like?
Yeah, I mean, I think leading from what Angela was saying, it is a company-wide mission. So not just our work with Special Olympics, but ensuring that our technology is accessible to anyone is core and critical to the mission of Microsoft and empowering every person. We actually do have a chief accessibility officer, and we do have set targets on how we're tracking. So recently, our accessibility team really just shared, I think, broadly and openly, our accessibility maturity model, how we're thinking about our journey, internally from an accessibility standpoint, and how we're really tracking, the accessibility of the products and things we're putting out in the world. And so it is a really open discussion. It is a really broad company effort, while led in some sense by an accessibility team. It is absolutely not limited there, right? It takes the village, and we need accessible content from a marketing standpoint. We need accessible products built from our engineers. And so it is a collective effort. What we see from the tournament and all of those different accommodations and inclusions is really built from that, of building that into our culture, of thinking about the needs of anyone who might want to be watching our content, participating in gaming, and how do we make sure that the technology we're creating, the programs, the platforms we're creating, aren't including those barriers that maybe we have unconsciously built, and continued throughout society. So how do we break those down? How do we think about what does someone who's deaf need to participate in gaming? What do we think about in terms of participating in meetings and conversations like this virtually? We think about how much the need for accessible technology maybe came to light during the COVID pandemic, when everyone was working from home, and you thought, gosh, what we used to be able to maybe make work was maybe more like a Band-Aid than a true inclusive environment. How do we build for that? And I think some of what we see in that gaming tournament is really just built into foundation, and we want to see progress, and we want to share and say, how do we make sure that that's actually the standard, not a shining example of the best practice?
Right. I think what you said is really important, just continuing the conversation as we navigate and change and evolve and strengthen and grow, not only as individuals who have these shared values, but also as corporations wanting to have shared values about inclusion. So I want to say to each of you, what does the inclusion revolution mean to you? Each of you probably has a different journey as to how you started to prioritize this work for yourself at your jobs, but also specifically just as a person. Scott, what does it mean to you, the inclusion revolution?
Yeah, so thanks. So I think at first, inclusion, it starts with education and awareness, and we still have a long ways to go in that area. I wish we could all think that we've made it, but we haven't. But it starts there, and from there, it's not just about that. It's really about how do we get equality? How do we, become a world of, non-bias? And I think with Special Olympics, this really brings to light, I think, everything that they have to offer. When there's so much divisiveness in this world today, I think that Special Olympics is the absolute thing that we all need to get on board. And if anyone hasn't been to a competition, I urge you to go to a competition and, just feel the joy that's around there. If you haven't coached, I encourage you to get out there and coach, even if you don't know a whole lot about that sport. We will help you get there. But it's all about those movements, and then they're global messengers. I don't know if anyone's ever had a global messenger, an athlete speak, powerful, inspiring, and I always know that I learn something every single day, the more that I'm exposed. And I hope that it is a revolution, and that we get to somewhere where we can no longer talk just about that. We can take it to the next level.
Hear, hear. I feel exactly the same way every time I do a conversation with Special Olympics and spend time with the community and with athletes. I'm the one who walks away having had my consciousness, my heart, my life changed, and I live to fight another day with more strength and more resilience and passion because of those relationships and because of the spirit of the community of Special Olympics. So I really appreciate what you said. I do think that way of looking at life and the community that is built with Special Olympics is exactly what the world needs across the board. So I'm so glad you articulated that. What does the inclusion revolution mean to you, Stephanie?
Yeah, Elisabeth, I love what Scott said. So proud to support unified athlete leadership. And I love the international global messengers. For me, it means it has to start with listening, and it means that society, and not the athletes, but society really has to address our own stigmas, our own biases to be more inclusive, to create that access. I will tell you some of the most eye-opening experiences have been through Special Olympics. I went through a workshop where athletes were leading a conversation around how to take Special Olympics to the next level. And it was interesting because when you ask people, and participants in attendance of that workshop, where Special Olympics should go, you know, we all had our own interpretation, our own ideas. And then they asked the athletes in the room, or athlete leaders who are facilitating the conversation, and their response in terms of where the mission of Special Olympics should go was very different. And it made us realize that their voice, their passion, and their love for this organization should be the front voice, should be the lead of where we go globally. And so in our company, you know, we've incorporated it in how we deliver better money habits in partnership with Special Olympics and the National Disability Institute. How do we talk about money, and are the athletes' voices and lived experiences top of mind? Our foundation president always says, proximity is really the key to transformative change. And I love what she said, because Special Olympics is a key demonstration of that. I also love how I was recently in a training led by our executives in technology, but also championed by the Disability Action Network, where it was teammates who didn't have disabilities, or at least they didn't log that they had visible or invisible disabilities, go through training so that when we do WebExes or Zooms, when we do PowerPoint presentations, we really understand how to make it accessible. So it's less training for, you know, my fellow teammates with diverse abilities. It's training for people like me so that I can understand how to be more inclusive of them in the way I deliver PowerPoint presentations, in the way I do virtual meetings like this one.
Yeah. Yeah. I keep hearing all of us saying the same thing again and again: accessibility, you know, and learning to communicate differently and creating opportunity, you know, by understanding more, being willing to learn from the Special Olympics community and the athletes based upon what they need in order to navigate and have the corporate world be more expansive and accessible to them. Carla, what is your thought on the inclusion revolution?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with Scott. If you have not been to a games, get there. It definitely changed my life. And the way I think of it, and this is why I believe I have the best job at my company, is for those associates at Coca-Cola who didn't get to a games or who haven't been to a game, I feel that is my role to introduce them to Special Olympics through other avenues. And unified leadership is a really great one. We've had a couple of amazing smaller group sessions where those global messengers are coming and speaking to our employees around what it means to be more inclusive in the workplace, telling their stories. There's really nothing like hearing their story. So to me, that's what I kind of wake up every day and kind of think about. How do I continue to advance that? How do we give these athletes a voice? How do we connect them to bigger opportunities, and really just lift them up on whatever platform makes sense for them? So that's what it means to me.
Angela?
First, I want to echo everything that everybody says in terms of the things that they're doing internally, right, to make sure they have the infrastructure and processes in place to address it from a company perspective. But what I also think is we are uniquely positioned, being a media company, to have access to a platform to really create visibility and awareness. And I'll start by saying one of the favorite quotes I have from a DE&I executive consultant, Verna Meyer, says, "Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance." And so I think if you take that framework in mind, our responsibility as it relates to our relationship with Special Olympics, and particularly as their broadcasting partner, is we make sure they get to dance, right? So that's how we do it, through the storytelling of these inspiring stories of these athletes. That's how we do it, by inviting some of their athletes like Dustin Plunkett and others to be broadcasters during the games, right? Who better to tell their stories? So I think for us, it's not just about making sure they're in the room, they're inclusive in the content, but we really get to convey it from their personal stories, from their personal journeys, and using our platforms to increase awareness around inclusion and what that means for Special Olympic athletes, but hearing it authentically through their voice, through their lens and their story. So I do think we have a unique position. So for me, it really is about being intentional, right? Not just getting people in the room, but being intentional about making sure everybody gets to dance, everybody has a voice, everybody gets to be seen and heard, and particularly for these athletes with intellectual disabilities. That's my responsibility as we look at the content and developing it for games, as we create the content and the storylines we want to do, and how we present it with using some of the athletes, like I said, as broadcasters. It really is a responsibility we have to bring more awareness to the effort and to the cause.
I love what you said, because at the end of the day, I think most people avoid making a difference in the world because they shy away from the discomfort of not knowing. And I love this quote by a poet named Rilke. He said, "We're living the question."
Yep.
And by having a conversation, we're beginning to change the world. The not knowing is okay. The being vulnerable, the stammering or saying something wrong and learning it from one another and opening up the conversation to create a more inclusive world, to change the world for the better, is the beginning of like a much more beautiful existence. But we avoid changing the world because we're afraid of making mistakes or misspeaking, or so we stay in our lane, and we don't open up to one another and teach each other to dance, which I think comes from asking each other the questions. How do we maintain in 2023 a more inclusive environment? How do we through our corporations, our personal lives, how do we make everybody feel more included and allow them to dance? And I think you're right, Angela. It's by asking the questions, staying open to that conversation, and continuing to learn from each other. So it's not just about being inclusive, but it's about creating accessibility, true accessibility to truly thrive in a more inclusive world. Thank you, everybody. And again, I want to echo what all of you have been doing for each other, which is totally seeing and hearing each other and celebrating each other, because every one of you has been bringing so much to this conversation, and I'm so grateful. Marcie, what is your takeaway on Inclusion Revolution? What does it mean to you?
Oh man, so hard to go at the end, such incredible answers. And I echo, what all of the other panelists have said. And I think what you were just sharing, I think of Inclusion Revolution, and I think of a world where everyone can fully participate, where anyone can achieve whatever it is they want to set out to do. And I think, as Stephanie said, that only happens through proximity. We don't know what we don't know. We don't break down our own unconscious bias or even recognize them until we step outside of our bubble and really meet people who are different, really get to know them as people and understand what the world is like through their lens. And one of the things I love about Special Olympics is they make that so easy. I think as everyone here has expressed the joy, the just welcoming, the environment of a Special Olympics event, whether that's a World Games or whether that's, coaching a smaller team, going to a smaller state event, or even having that kind of sense of reverse mentoring, a global messenger coming in to speak to you. There is never any judgment, there is only openness and warmth and learning. And I think it's one of the best places to start, if you're on that journey of how do I be vulnerable and learn, this is the community, they open arms and welcome you on the journey.
I think that is brilliant, because that's something I want to really be specific about, is how to be a true partner with Special Olympics versus a sponsor. A partner walking hand in hand, learning from each other and becoming a part of a community together. And as huge corporations, Coca-Cola, ESPN, Microsoft, Gallagher, and Bank of America, it's the biggest giants of industry. What would you, leave for, other people, other corporations that haven't yet dipped their toe into a more inclusive environment in the workspace? What would, what guidance would you give them? What piece of advice? I know one of them is to partner with Special Olympics, because ultimately, like you said, Marcie, they make it safe, they make it accessible, and they want to help us learn to be more inclusive in our work environments. So any piece of advice you'd give any other employees or employers out there?
I think part of it goes back also, I think, for what Marcie pointed out about being vulnerable, right? Admitting what you don't know, but opening yourself up and being vulnerable to listen and to learn, I think is a huge part of it in working with Special Olympics or any organization in this space, right? Because you want to get it right. Because I think you only get a couple of chances to get it right before, external people start, bashing you. But really opening yourself up, being vulnerable, being transparent about where your gaps are, where you need help, but being open to the process and learning and taking a partner along with you to really be intentional in formulating something that's really authentic and can be empowering.
Yeah. Good.
Carla.
Yeah, so I love that, Angela, and I agree. I think for us at Coca-Cola, one thing that I really admire about what we do and what we've done for a very long time is kind of starting with our own associates, right? And so Coca-Cola, I will say, everybody will say, oh, Coca-Cola, you have the best brands in the world. Really, the magic of Coke, it's the people. And I think the reason that is we have such an inclusive environment at Coke. We're very purposeful about inclusion network. It's called Disabilities. And it's basically this awesome network of associates that are supporting each other, and they serve as thought leaders and advocates for how we can be more inclusive. And I think it takes courage for companies to give and empower their associates in that way, because you're going to have to listen and you're going to have to be open. And as Angela said, you're going to have to be vulnerable and make changes. And I think that's a really big step. So I'm really proud of the work there. So my advice would be start with your own associates and what they have to say. I think that could really be a good starting point.
I'm so glad you talked about that, because I was going to ask each of you what your advice would be to employees who want to see their work environment be more inclusive. Who are the right people to talk to, and what sort of questions should they ask at work if they want to make an impact and have their work environment be more inclusive? Do any of you guys want to touch on that a little bit more? Thank you so much, Carla, and thank you, Angela.
I'll go. Go ahead,
Scott.
I'll go, and then I'll turn it over to Scott. Okay. I will say, I totally agree, first of all, that our employees and starting from the inside out is so critical when we create this evolution for inclusion, right? Inclusion revolution. So what I would say is, in the sphere of influence that we have as individuals, as managers, as leaders, who's not at the table? And when we talk about diversity and equity and inclusion and now access, right? There's that intentionality to ensure that our teammates are at the table to help guide us to what our company can do to be more responsible, to be more inclusive, but most importantly, to accept and include our communities with dignity, respect, and authenticity. And so our employees absolutely drive our company's vision for inclusion, not just our Disability Action Network, but also our Parents and Caregivers Network, right? And our intergenerational network, building up love and respect, and then also addressing some stigmas in a very courageous way so that we know how to approach issues that might be sensitive is really important for our associates to lead and hold us accountable for.
Thank you. Scott.
Yes, so I've heard the word intentional a few times today, and that's probably my favorite word, we have to back it up. And I think I love the fact that over the years, employees and prospective employees have jumped up and asked the questions. And it doesn't always start with, what are the job duties and how much does it pay? It's like, tell me about your culture. Tell me what you're doing in this area. And that wasn't the way it was many, many years ago. So I love the fact that it is, and I love to be challenged and love to be asked, because I think it helps all of us grow. But I also think that organizations, maybe if they're not just in one site, and all the employees are on site, right? This pandemic taught us many things. Like, we're now more remote, so we get to have a more diverse workforce, but also the culture values.
Yeah, Scott, you talked about in the beginning the importance of, the Special Olympics attributes and, and the movement and in how that can change the world and all of our consciousness, but also specifically corporate consciousness. Can any of you mention a story or some sort of journey that Special Olympics athletes have brought into your corporate world that really created a big impact or created a deeper commitment on your part to continue your work? Carla?
Did my smile,
yeah,
did my
you're
smile
like, yes,
give that
I
away?
have.
Yeah. So I'll highlight, I've gotten to know a Special Olympics athlete named Daniel Smrkowski. And for those of you who may or may not know Daniel, his intellectual disability makes it hard for him to communicate. But as part of his story, he has really taken that as this grand challenge for his life and leaned into communication as his job. So not only is he an amazing brand ambassador and employed by United Airlines, he also has launched his own podcast called Special Chronicles. And we've recorded a couple of podcasts with him, which has been really amazing. We invited him to be on our youth panel at a recent community engagement summit, along with some amazing youth that he's now connected with, that he's now invited on, and they're being his guests on his podcast. And the next step, he actually just sent me a one-pager yesterday, is to begin socializing his podcast with other Coca-Cola associates to see who would like to engage and go on and tell their story on Daniel's podcast. And of course, I would be starting with our Disability Network because it gives them such an amazing platform. So he stands out as it's just one individual. I mean, that is just one Special Olympics athlete that is kind of rippling through our organization right at this moment. And of course, there are many, many others, but he's a real standout for us this year.
Marcie.
I'm always blown away by the connection. Liz, we just had a chance recently with Special Olympics to have two of the shoutcasters from the Gaming for Inclusion event speak to a team internally at Microsoft that's outside of our gaming division and our cloud team and part of their diversity and learning kind of curriculum and series. And the thing that really stuck with me was, again, the vulnerability of people speaking up and parents speaking up and saying, thank you. I am the parent of a child with a disability or an intellectual disability. And just last week in this session, a father speaking up saying he had a son with an intellectual disability who loves gaming and had no idea this was a connection. And how do they get connected? And being able to bridge, through Special Olympics, that local connection, because it is such a global movement. And it's rare, I think. I don't know about my other panelists, but I think it's rare for me to be on a work call and see someone move to tears. And that just sticks with me every time when you're helping bridge that connection for a person, whether you know them well or not, that you work with, and learning more, about the struggles or the unique challenges in their life every time we have the chance to bring Special Olympics in to speak to a team. I see that happen, maybe not every time the tears, but every time the connection and the gratitude, for finding community. And I just think that keeps me going there's more, we haven't connected everyone that needs to be. So how do we keep going?
Yeah, I love that, because we think our work is to change the world, but it's really ourselves that change through our relationship with Special Olympics and their athletes. And to be more inclusive really changes us, our hearts, our consciousness, and our contribution becomes more meaningful. Angela, has there been any, particular story that has changed the organization through this more inclusive environment that you've been fostering?
I think for us, again, being a broadcast partner, we get firsthand view into the lens and the lives of Special Olympic athletes. I think for me, it's times, as I mentioned earlier, when we've had some of the athletes like Dustin or Dana, who did it, the games most recently, to serve as a broadcaster, right? So they come on campus. We really get to know him and her and to hear their stories in a very intimate way. As we begin to formulate the work and the production for the games, we get a firsthand, lens and view into their lives. And so I think for me, it's that personal contact as we're working together from a production standpoint. You really get to know and see them and see the energy and their passion for this work. They hold their own, right? Dustin and Dana sat there with Kevin Nagandi and some of our other Sports Center talent as part of the broadcast, and they held their own and could tell in a very meaningful and compelling way their story. I think for me, it's the manifestation of that gets and allows our employees, but also our viewers and our fans to see the relevance to people with intellectual disabilities being in this field and doing this work, that they're capable of doing that, and they're demonstrating and living that, right? They have a passion and interest in working in this field. So for me, I think it's really just seeing all of this manifest itself for us from a production perspective and being part of that journey as we develop the storylines for all the games, and having these athletes to come along with us in the journey and be part of the content, be part of the broadcasting of it. Just really, I think for me, emanates personally, really sits with me, because you just see the joy that it brings to them, and wanting to tell their story, wanting to be seen and heard, and wanting to be accepted.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just curious, for each of you individually, what brought you to this work within your corporate structure? Do any of you have a personal story, or what is your journey? I mean, how did you begin to work in this manner, and dedicate your time and sort of your work environment to a more inclusive environment? Scott?
Yeah, so I'll give I think it helps to go back a little bit. So we talked about, if you haven't seen something, right, you become uncomfortable. So therefore you kind of become standoffish. And I was blessed at the opportunity of an early age. So I do not have anyone in my immediate family with an intellectual disability, but sports was always a big thing when I was, 8, 9, 10, et cetera. I never became the professional athlete that I wanted to be at that age. But growing up in a fairly small town, I was playing soccer, and they finally brought soccer into my own town, and we had one field and too many teams for that. So we were able to partner with another town, and this was an adult school for intellectual disabled individuals. And you can imagine that was a little uncomfortable at first, but they started to attend all of our games. Every single game, they would come, the same individuals, and they would cheer us on. And they had lights on their field. And if you're 8, 9 years old, you get to play with lights on the field. Like, this is a big deal. So I think that was my first opportunity. And then from there, right, participating in college, and then also getting involved in the summer games and the fall games, and then as I've had the opportunity to coach my sons, it's like, I want to be able to give back and coach as well. And it's so much more fun coaching. So it's been a long journey, and I'm just so pleased that Gallagher, has become a proud partner of Special Olympics as well. And they've, allowed me to somewhat be an ambassador and help spread, the joy that I've found as well. So a long journey, but hopefully that's the shorter version.
Anybody want to add to that?
I'll go, Elizabeth. So for me, it is personal. My husband, I know he'll be okay with me saying this because he talks about it publicly. He has dyslexia, and so going through school was hard for him. And, after getting to know him better and dating, I realized he's one of those brilliant, talented men that I know. He just learns differently. And over the years, as I volunteered, because volunteering is really near and dear to my heart, as a lead up to, and the reason why I work for Bank of America, I realized that our teammates with diverse abilities have amazing talent that oftentimes are overlooked because people only see the disability first. And so I really came to this work. One, I was like so super excited to be able to manage the Special Olympics partnership because of the mission and the movement that it represents. but also meeting some of these amazing international global messengers, my own teammates in support services and throughout the company who've confided in me and told me about their non-visible disabilities. Like, you shouldn't have to see their disability first. You see their talent first, and then everything else should support and lift up their ability to add value to our team, to our company, and to live out and achieve their goals. So that's why I do what I do, but it is personal, and I have 3 children, and I want my children to grow up in a world where whether that person is different or they're different, they can still play on the same team. They can still play basketball. They could still be in the same class and learn together.
Well, I know everybody, thank you so much for sharing that. And I feel like we have talked about every single topic, but except for one thing, I just want to say, like, what does the future look like as business leaders for you? What does the future look like when it comes to inclusion? Marcie, do you want to sort of touch on that?
Oh, I hope brighter, but I think it looks like this. I think it looks like more companies coming together, more organizations coming together. I think none of us get there alone, and so how do we learn from each other? How do we keep the open conversation and share? I think that hopefully the days of inclusion being a proprietary benefit and trying to keep it to yourself and retain the best talent, it becomes a shared aspiration, a shared goal, and a platform that we're all trying to lift and move forward.
Do any of you want to add any last thoughts?
The only thing I would add to that, to Marcie's point, I hope that as I think about or dream about what it should become, I hope that this DE&I function for most companies isn't just that. It's not a function. It's integrated into who that company is and the framework and the core of who they are and what they stand for from a culture, that we don't have to have these explicit DE&I conversations. It's just innate in who they are and how you show up. And my aspiration is that we continue to reflect, as Marcie mentioned, the world and the diversity of the world in how we come together and partner. That's my hope and dream, that if we do this right, there shouldn't be a need for a function. It really just should be core to every company's business.
Yeah, and that we keep the conversation going, and it isn't, sort of a rarity. It's just something naturally that we're always discussing and sort of trying to strengthen and grow from and learn from each other. And the community Special Olympics has built with such love and dedication. Thank you guys so much for your time, for being the great partners that you are to Special Olympics. Thanks for being a part of my community. This has been incredibly inspiring. And for any corporation out there that hasn't yet begun to exercise these practices, I know this will be really informative to them, inspiring to them, hopefully. I know that it has been inspiring to a particular mom here. Erica said she has a child with Down syndrome, and this conversation has given her so much hope for her child's future. And I just wish you the most beautiful new year and happy holidays. And just thank you so much. Special Olympics, thank you for having us. We appreciate this continued conversation on having inclusive work environments. So thank you, Marcie, Angela, Carla, Stephanie, and Scott. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, everybody. Happy holidays.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Happy
you.
holidays.
Happy holidays. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you, Elizabeth.